Hi, I'm Kira, and this is my hope story. I was raised in a Christian household. I went to church on Sundays and I went to church on Wednesdays. I grew up knowing the Lord. I gave my life to the Lord at a very young age. I gave my life to Jesus at New Hope in kindergarten. And I grew up knowing about Holy Spirit and about speaking in tongues. And still, I found myself dealing with anxiety and depression. I had moved around a lot growing up, and when I was in 6th grade, we had moved to a different city, and I had to leave behind some of my first real friends I've ever made. I had to leave them behind. I felt like I was almost grieving. I was dealing with confusion and anger, and I'm in 6th grade, and all of the middle school feelings, and I needed to find a way to deal with these feelings, and I began self-harming. I began cutting, and that was my answer at the time. I did it pretty much any time that I felt low or lonely, and I had moved to a new city and I was homeschooled, so I was lonely all the time, so I was cutting all the time. My mom would hold women's prayer meetings in our house every so often, and during those prayer meetings I would go out to eat with my dad. And I would go get candy at Party City, and I always looked forward to those days. But my mom had asked that I had stay behind and I stay at the prayer meeting, and I was not looking forward to it. But I stayed, and at these prayer meetings, all we did is we had one person in the middle and everybody prayed over them, whether they knew what that person in the middle was going through or not. And I don't think anybody knew what I was going through, but as they began to pray for me, I felt something lift off of my shoulders, and I felt lighter and I felt more relaxed. And I remember just crying and feeling free. And I looked in the mirror, in the bathroom mirror after that prayer meeting, and I remember thinking that I looked different. I looked like a new person. And I believe that God had delivered me and healed me from anxiety and depression for that time. My family had made another move, and we had moved back to Abilene, and I was back at New Hope, and I was asked to serve on the worship team for a Freedom Weekend, which I had never attended before. And I thought I was there to serve, but really I was receiving, and I was receiving truths that I hadn't been taught, and I was receiving seeds. God was planting seeds in my heart about who I was and about who He was for me and about the freedom that I could walk in. After that, I was the Jesus girl at school. I read my Bible. I told people about the end times. I invited people to church. I loved being at church. Now, one of my friends had passed away suddenly, and that caused me to go into a cycle of confusion, depression, insecurity, and it spurred up a lot of negative emotions and thoughts and beliefs about who God was. These doubts and these feelings, this depression, this anxiety, it continued out throughout my college years. My husband and I started dating in 2021. He had moved down to Abilene, and our relationship was great. And I really believed that marriage was going to be an answer to a lot of my problems. I wouldn't be alone. And all of the negative things that I heard about myself and that I told myself and that I came in agreement with, He would be able to fight those off. And He would be able to tell me who I was and what my identity was. And when we got married and He wasn't able to fix those things for me, I hit a new time low. I began cutting again. I was in college. My family had recommended that I try medication for my depression and anxiety, and I've tried a lot of them. I've been on multiple medications. I've tried multiple things, and I still was not finding that healing that I thought I would find in Alan, or that I thought I would find in my medicine. And it was frustrating, and I began to lose hope. Medicine after medicine and fight after fight with my husband, and I began to lose hope, and I didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't know how I was raised in church and how I knew the truth of who God was, and I still found myself mutilating myself and depressed and crying on my kitchen floor. Not long after I'd been married, I had a plan to end my life. I was going to take all those failed medications that were supposed to save me, and I was going to take them all at the same time, and it was going to end all of my pain and all of my hurt. I was seeing a counselor at the time, and they had recommended that I check into Oceans. And I remember putting on the paper gown. I remember a nurse taking a picture at all the scars on my thighs with her iPad so she could make sure that while I was there, I wasn't cutting myself because I couldn't be trusted there. And I just remember thinking, how did I end up here? My mom had made sure that I brought a Bible with me to Oceans, and I read it, and I began to open Psalms and read that even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And read about how he makes us lie down in green pastures and beside still waters. And I remember thinking that I serve a funny God, that he would send me to Oceans, a behavioral hospital where I can hear people in psychosis screaming and feeling his peace and feeling like I was sitting beside still waters because I had gotten to his word. Every group therapy session we did there, I remember thinking, I learned this at Freedom Weekend. I learned this at Freedom Weekend. I learned not to speak negative things over me. I learned not to come into agreement with word curses and inner vows. I learned this at Freedom Weekend, but I hadn't applied it. A lot of people who end up going to behavioral hospitals end up going back again. And some of the nurses and people there had even made comments that, oh, we'll see, even if you check out, we'll see you again. Because it's so common for someone to go back to their suicide plan or go back and end up in a place where they need to be at a place like Oceans. And I saw these people around me, and people who were married, people who had kids, people who were alone, people who were addicts. And I knew that I had the answer. I had Jesus. I had the answer the whole time. And from then I was determined. I will not be coming back here. I will not be going back to this physical place and this mental place where I hate myself, this mental place where I don't know who I am. And they gave me a sheet of paper of affirmations to say over myself. I am successful. I began to speak the word over myself. I began to speak who God says over me. I began to speak that over myself and began to share it with the people at Oceans because I was determined to leave and never come back. I think I dealt with the pain, and I think I dealt with my issues for far longer than I had to because I lived in shame. I was on the worship team, I was on staff at New Hope, and I was so embarrassed to be struggling with anxiety. I was so embarrassed and ashamed that I wanted to end my life that God gave me. I wanted to end it, and I couldn't see all the good things that God had blessed me with, and I felt like if I brought it to light that I would be rejected, that I would be kicked off of the worship team, or I would be kicked off of staff. I thought if I brought it to light, people would see I was a fraud, that I wasn't a leader, that I wasn't where God had called me to be. In reality, the spiritual family I had at New Hope wrapped their arms around me, and they accepted me for exactly where I was. Not only did they accept me, but they helped me, and they guided me into healing, and they guided me into a life that I didn't have to live alone, and that I didn't have to live in shame. Before, my life was a series of events, and how I felt and my mindset depended on the circumstances around me. But now I'm walking in everlasting freedom and healing and joy. I wake up full of joy. I wake up and I get in the Word. I walk the Word out. I worship from a place of gratitude, from a place of healing, and that healing and that gratitude, that joy and that freedom, it's available for us all, and it's available at any time. Once I realized that everything that I was looking for Alan to fix, or looking for self-harm to fix, looking for medication to fix, once I realized that all of that was found in Jesus, I was healed. My marriage was healed. My marriage was restored. I'm so thankful to stand alongside a husband that stayed with me throughout all of that. And I'm thankful for New Hope Church for never rejecting me, but for encouraging me, coming alongside me, and walking me into my place of freedom. I'm Kira, and this is my hope story.